Hey, welcome everybody. We are joined today by Dave Feldman. You're actually just a computer software engineer, right?
Funny computer guy.
Yes.
Dave Feldman. Okay. But can you tell us a little bit, for anybody who doesn't know about Dave Feldman? Boy, we're going to have some fun
You're
today.
missing out.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what changed in your life in 2015? Like what's all this all about?
Yeah, so in 2015, I'm doing quite well with platform architecture and software development.
Yeah. Computer stuff, right?
Computer stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Had definitely no interest in nutrition or medicine or any of that.
Yeah.
But I was interested in how it looked like I was developing diabetes because I got a test, an A1C, and sure enough, it was showing that I was creeping toward diabetes. It was a 6.1 for the second year in a row.
Okay.
And I was like, I don't want to head in the direction that I've seen a lot of my family who have full-blown type 2 diabetes. So I started researching and found that this low-carb diet thing was coming up and becoming big.
Okay.
So I adopted, and all of a sudden it's like I found the fountain of youth. All of a sudden I'm losing weight. I was, running at the time, and I'm starting to break personal records, and I'm feeling better, and I sleep better, and everything's just better, seemingly. So around that time, my dad and my sister also adopted with me. So we're all doing it. But I'm like, hey, but just be mindful, blood work. As it turns out, sometimes people see like a slight increase in cholesterol from when I was going on the forums.
Okay.
Some people
Yeah.
said that. And sure enough, for the two of them, it was a slight increase in cholesterol, but not for me. For me, my cholesterol went through the roof.
Okay.
And that's when I became obsessed. I had to figure out why. I had to find out why that happened.
And when we're talking about through the roof, we're talking hundreds and hundreds. It was up there, right?
100, not hundreds and hundreds, but hundreds enough. Mine was about almost exactly average at around 120, 130, which
Okay.
for a male at my age, that was about like right in the middle. And it had jumped to around like 230, 240, which is in the top 1% of the population.
That's a range where you would be prescribed a statin.
Yeah.
Correct. In fact, that's actually part of the existing guidelines. The guidelines are if you have an LDL of 190 or higher, without any other consideration, like it doesn't matter what any of your other markers are, it's recommended that you be on the highest tolerated dose of statin because it's that concerning from, conventional medical standpoint.
Yeah, and this is relevant because the conventional wisdom is for the last 50 or so, or maybe we're at the 70 years now, is that having high cholesterol can be bad for your health in and of itself because they seem to find a correlation between cholesterol and heart disease. Does one cause the other? Which one of these is cause? Which one of these is effect? Should you be eliminating saturated fat? Is it actually just a guise to get us to eat less animal products? But I won't go into that. But so you, as an engineer, not the kind that drives trains, but the kind that puts together software, you started looking at this whole question about cholesterol and all of that, kind of like what's actually causing this? Because you've got your engineer hat on, right?
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about your journey, how you've progressed over the last couple of years, where we're at today?
Yeah. Naturally, I have to really simplify and brief it up because
Yes.
a lot has happened. I found that there were a lot of things that were similar when learning about how our bodies move cholesterol around with the actual systems we use in technology, including networks. It is a network.
Yeah.
And if you're powered by fat, there has to be this process in place that moves it around in our bloodstream with these carrier proteins. So without getting into the deeper details, the major carrier protein is a lipoprotein.
Because you can't have fat go through water in your blood.
Without something to carry it.
Yeah.
Right. It clumps together. You can do this at home right now. Take butter, take ghee, take any kind of oils, put it into water, and won't mix well. Well, our blood is water-based.
Yeah.
So it's actually a fairly sophisticated system that our body's using to move it around. But the bulk carrier is an ApoB. ApoB you may have heard of. It's the major protein, and it's attached to these complexes that carry the fat we're fueled by, but it's also the major carrier for cholesterol.
And that's just a small component of these lipoproteins, right?
The cholesterol?
Yeah, the cholesterol.
I would say there's two major components to these complexes that are ApoB lipoproteins.
Okay.
One is triglycerides.
Fats.
Yeah. And the other is cholesterol.
Okay.
And the easiest way to think of it, that I like to think of it, and I think a lot of people can, is these ApoB things, they're bloated. They start out big.
Yeah.
With this cargo, and their job is to get small. So when they leave, they either leave the gut or they leave the liver. Those are the two places that they start, and they're entering into the bloodstream. If you're powered by fat, my hypothesis and the model we've since published would say you're putting out more of these because you're powered by it. You need to traffic them more.
Yeah.
You need to keep moving them through the body more so that your cells have access to them, right? And that means there's greater turnover. It's kind of like, let's say trays of hors d'oeuvres at a party.
Yeah.
They get pulled off the tray faster. That means there's going to be more trays in circulation more,
okay.
Right? So to keep it somewhat simplistic. Anyway, I realize I'm already kind of getting into a little bit on the details of this thing, but it's important because getting back to, is cholesterol a big component? It becomes a bigger component if they're part of the tray that I'm talking about now.
Okay.
If that's what's left over on the tray. And in the case of lipoproteins, that's what's left over from those major deliverers. So if you're sending more out and there's more turnover, you have more of those spent, if you will, lipoproteins where mostly the triglycerides are taken off, but a lot of the cholesterol is still on board.
Okay.
Right. And that's important because LDL cholesterol is really meaning cholesterol that's on low-density lipoproteins. And they're kind of like spent VLDL. So you can almost think of LDL boats, if you will, that are in the bloodstream as that. Anyway, so let me circle back. Why do I think my cholesterol went high and my dad and my sisters didn't?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a bit more leaner, which we find out later is very important, and a bit more metabolically healthy. They would concede this, right? And that's kind of important too, because also the fat we have around our body is another component to this story. Okay. The leaner you are, the more you have to move fat around at a faster rate.
Okay.
So while my cholesterol is high, you've seen my collaborator, Nick Norwitz, his cholesterol is really high.
Okay.
I am not ashamed to say he is a lot leaner than I am.
I saw a picture of him with his shirt off, and I thought it was a stock photo of like a bodybuilder. I actually had to, I was like, nah, like he's ripped. Anyway, but his cholesterol is significantly higher.
Right.
Okay.
Which gets us to the other part of this, which is the one everyone's interested in. This geek talk is fun for us geeks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But is it risky? Is what you said going to prove to be true in that if these folks have higher cholesterol, if Nick has higher cholesterol, if I have higher cholesterol, if many people watching this have higher cholesterol, is it going to cause more heart disease? Well, obviously, we're very interested in finding out as fast as we can. Mm-hmm. And so the conference you mentioned, it is to help raise money for the research that we're conducting to make this happen, to find out if indeed these higher levels of LDL resulting specifically from being on a low-carb diet are going to associate with this higher level of plaque that develops in the body, particularly in the coronary arteries, which is, where we would get a heart attack.
Because for the last, like 50, 60 years, the U.S. government, other governments have been funding studies to test the diet heart hypothesis. Is that the name of it?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two versions.
Okay.
The diet heart hypothesis is typically what associates back to Ansel Keys
Yeah.
and usually links saturated fat to heart disease.
Okay.
The lipid hypothesis is kind of a couple decades later and
Okay.
links back to Brown and Goldstein and is more specific to LDL or even more recently ApoB and its association with cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
But to simplify, I could say that the lipid hypothesis by modern lipidologists today would say, look, at the end of the day, higher ApoB, more heart disease risk. So from their perspective, these folks that we're looking at,
Mm-hmm.
if they have sky-high ApoB, and they will, the ones that we're researching,
Yeah.
then they should have a rapid development of plaque at a population level. So as a group, there should be, a lot of high heart disease. Obviously, I'm hoping that we don't find that to be the case.
Yeah.
But that's why we have to study it.
Well, I can understand where they're coming from because it's based on a hypothesis that when you look at people who have had a heart attack and you look at the amount of cholesterol that they have in their system, there seems to be a correlation between if you have a higher cholesterol, then, or rather people who have these heart issues tend to have higher cholesterol. It's difficult to know which one of those is cause, which one of those is effect. Anyway, but you're trying to actually test some stuff out because you've got this group of people. You call them lean mass hyperresponders.
Right.
Before you started calling them that, I don't know that there was a name for them, and you've kind of coined this term. Fortunately, everybody seems to accept that.
Yeah, it's worth emphasizing. So lean mass hyperresponders, many are watching this right now, may already know what it is, but for those who don't,
Yeah.
it's not just having a high LDL cholesterol. It's folks who have this triad, these three things.
Okay.
High LDL, high HDL cholesterol,
Okay.
the so-called good cholesterol, and low triglycerides, the measure of fat in the blood. And the reason these three together are so important is because the more that one is leaner and metabolically healthy, typically the more their LDL not only increases, but also their HDL increases. And that's an important clue.
Okay.
But also typically the lower their triglycerides. Now, the reason this is so relevant is the people you mentioned before, when they're looking at those who have, for example, poor metabolic health, but a high LDL cholesterol associated with it, those other two markers tend to be the reverse.
Okay.
It tends to be that they have lower HDL cholesterol and higher triglycerides. Now, the good thing is I can kind of link this back to anybody who was listening to the first part that we were just talking about in the podcast. You remember how I said that there's trafficking, right?
Yeah.
There's more of the fat that's loaded onto these,
Those
we'll call them
trains.
submarines,
Okay.
right? that are going into circulation, and the triglycerides are being taken off by cells, just like, yes, people at the dinner party that are
Yeah.
taking it off the trays. But what if the cells aren't? What if cells aren't taking as much of the triglycerides that are inside these boats?
Okay.
What does that mean? Well, that means that these will hang out for longer. If they're hanging out for longer, it's taking more time.
Yeah.
Then that also means that ApoB, the major protein, is also going to hang out in circulation for a longer span of time.
And then the shrimp starts to go bad on the hors d'oeuvre trays.
Exactly. And then, but yeah, this is important because guess what? Guess what also tends to go up when triglycerides are turned over? If they're turned over successfully, HDL cholesterol goes up.
Okay.
If they're not being turned over, if there's less getting taken off the tray, triglycerides go up, HDL comes down.
Gotcha.
So the more metabolically healthy you are, the more you tend to have low triglycerides and high HDL as a result of the lowering of the triglycerides, right? More picking off the tray at a faster rate means that you're going to have lower triglycerides, higher HDL.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is important because up until now, we've only ever had data on people with some form of dysfunction
Yeah.
and how they're handling these lipids.
Okay.
There's always a party that's got a problem.
Yeah.
The food's not getting taken off the trays. And scientists, well-meaning scientists, are constantly going, oh, but that's where we find the problems. There's enormous confidence that they can say we can feel still pretty sure that it's the ApoB because through statistical analysis, we believe that we've accounted for how much there's a contribution of, say, HDL and triglycerides, such that ApoB is what's left over.
So I'm just trying to understand what's being talked about here. Is the hypothesis that the ApoB protein, something in it, causes damage?
Yes. That the complex that we're talking about, the lipoprotein,
Yeah.
that the ApoB is attached to,
Uh-huh.
that it is what they would call it as atherogenic, atherosclerosis generating. So it develops plaque in and of itself.
So just let me restate that again. The hypothesis is that a molecule that's created by human DNA damages the human body?
That it is inherently disease-causing.
That's interesting.
To be fair, there are things. Okay. A good example is glucose, right? Human body makes glucose.
It
so
absolutely can.
A critic, or let's just say a devil's advocate, would be like, well, of course, Chris, the body can overproduce something.
Yeah.
Now, what I will say,
That's true.
I'll concede, my natural skeptic instinct did jump in when I was first learning about all this, is take away things like mutations.
Okay.
I'm naturally going to be skeptical that something's been conserved by the majority of the human race that's naturally pathogenic. In other words, I think it's one thing to be like, oh, here's a mutation that occurs in 1 or 2% of the population. That, I think, is actually part of how we literally have evolution, that literally there is an intentional degree of mutation that keeps allowing nature to keep experimenting.
Yeah.
But the through line, things that most of us have as part of our system, throughout time, medicine has been like, oh, you know what? Good example is blood volume. We make too much blood. And therefore, that's why bloodletting became such a common means of therapy. We've since said, no, that's mostly not true, vastly mostly not true. In some cases, it is. In some cases, bloodletting can be therapeutic. But mostly, no, it's not that the human body in general makes too much blood, right? But it took us, I don't know, a couple 100 years or something like that to figure that out. There are other things like tonsils, tonsils being removed. It was pretty much assumed that tonsils were, as it turns out, actually tonsils have more of an effect or have more of a connection to the immune system, for example. So it turned out not to be as benign as what was thought before. The appendix is another great example, right? And I say this with love in my heart because, I think these are all well-intentioned folks.
Yeah.
But I'm just reluctant in general to assume that something that's been conserved through evolution, that exists throughout the animal kingdom, should be assumed to be pathogenic on net. That's not my endorsing it.
Yeah.
Nor is it my saying that the lipid hypothesis is dead by any means. It's just that that's also why I'm interested in things like all-cause mortality.
What's all-cause mortality?
All-cause mortality is if you die of anything,
You're dead.
yeah, you're dead. That's a metric. So if we run a study and I say, hey, I believe if I change this exposure and it has a change on this outcome, that I'll have some information that's very relevant for us. And if the exposure is, we can come up with anything, but I like to keep it anonymized in this version. If that exposure reduction reduces this bad outcome, then that's great if the outcome is some form of disease-based death.
Okay.
So be it cancer. Let's say, for example, I said, hey, I'm running this this study that's reducing the exposure of cell phone radiation.
Okay.
And this, very minute amount of radiation that can come from a cell phone, I believe it can have an impact on cancer deaths.
Okay.
But the catch is that my intervention in removing the cell phones actually results in less calls to the hospital or something like that. That's another effect called pleiotropy.
Oh, wow, that's a great
That's
word.
a nice word.
I know, it's great, but basically it's a knock-on effect of something else,
Yeah.
which is why I would be interested in not just whether or not less people were dying of cancer
From the cell phone radiation.
from the cell phone radiation. I may, in fact, be inducing more deaths by another means.
Yes.
And that actually reduces the amount of deaths by the group that I've made the change in by the means I'm interested in.
Okay.
So, sorry, I know this probably gets a bit more convoluted by getting that complex, but this is the reason why the very first thing I went to when I was first researching this is I said, okay, if high LDL is bad for this association, then if you're born with a genetic abnormality of low LDL cholesterol,
Oh, okay.
you should live the longest,
Yeah.
Right.
right? And in fact, there's a genetic abnormality called PCSK9 loss of function. You don't need to memorize that. Just know that those folks will have LDL in like the 30s their
wow.
entire life.
Oh, wow.
So if you would compare this to, say, smoking, let's say smoking is the exposure, and let's say we were all born into societies that you get the equivalent of a pack a day of cigarette smoke that you're just living and breathing in. We would expect that population of people would just die more than those who were born into a society where there was no smoking,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So seems fairly straightforward. But people with PCSK9 loss of function, there's not a difference in all-cause mortality.
Ah,
There is a difference in cardiovascular disease mortality. So by that token, if the amount of LDL, particularly ApoB, levels are already pathogenic, which is to say that they're already going to cause more disease naturally, then you'd be lucky if you were born genetically with an abnormality that you had very low levels of LDL/ApoB.
Yeah, like something's filtering out that cigarette smoke just to you alone.
Right, right.
And so you would live longer.
Exactly. So the PCSK9 loss of function folks were very interesting to me very early on because it didn't show the signal of lower all-cause mortality, even though they do, in fact, have lower cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
So this led me to wonder, but I do it tepidly, as to whether or not there is an immune connection to ApoB lipoproteins. For example, are they part of the immune response?
Okay.
Now, I kind of want to set that aside, frankly, because that's its own area of research, and just say, look, bottom line is this. We just have not had any ability until recently to look at high LDL, or for that matter, ApoB lipoproteins in isolation. We've always had that cluster of, for example, low HDL or high triglycerides, or in the case of those who have, it's a mouthful, homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia.
hold on. Say that again.
Homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia.
Now you say it.
We call it FCH.
Oh, cyclocholesteremia.
Yeah. Short version with this is that 50 years ago, Brown and Goldstein won the Nobel Prize because they were looking at children who do have sky-high levels of LDL,
Okay.
but who also get cardiovascular disease very early.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which is concerning. But that was a catalyzing moment where they were like, oh,
Oh, it
so
must
for
be-
sure, high LDL causes.
Okay.
Now, I would, delicately say, but to be fair, in both these cases, there's some dysfunction in lipid metabolism. So, getting back to these lean mass hyperresponders, this is the only time that I'm aware of where we're going to be doing a study on people with very high levels of LDL, but do not have some dysfunction
Okay.
in their lipid metabolism. So there's not that clustering of other things we know to be cardiovascular disease risks independently.
This is interesting, and you want to study it, but nobody wants to pay for this study to be done because there's not a drug on the line. There's no real good, I guess, push for it.
Frankly, that is true, at least with regard to the typical ways you'd get a study done.
Yeah.
There's pretty much two channels. One is the NIH. The NIH is sort of government funding for studies. Frankly, we're pretty confident that they're not going to be that interested in it. But even so, you have to write a grant. You have to put in a lot, and it can take years. It can take a long time, even if you're successful at getting a grant. The other is, yes, there needs to be some kind of business case typically.
Yeah.
And there's not really a business case. We're like seeking out data, and there's not really a way to monetize what may turn out to be a low risk, population if we're right that it's a low risk population. So decided to take a shot. You and I come from the world of Kickstarters.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Which is, could I just go to the people, the low carbers in particular, and say, can you just help me crowdfund a study? And it was a chance. I mean, it's funny because thinking back to it, I started the Citizen Science Foundation, which is a bona fide 501c3 public charity. But I did it in the hopes that I would raise the money. I didn't know for sure if it would work. I knew this. I knew that if I was right, ultimately, and I don't know yet if I am, but if I was right, then understandably the study would get highly scrutinized. So what would be
Have to do it the right way.
Right, exactly. So what would be the right way? And I thought about these in 2018. So I was like, okay, well, it'd be great if it was through a science charity. It'd be great if I was raising the money predominantly through individuals, as opposed to partnering with some big corporation, even if they would align with the ideals or whatever. And and if basically I just put in the footwork to try to raise the money straight. And that's what happened. Citizen Science Foundation finally got to put together what we're calling the Lean Mass Hyperresponders study. And I'm proud to say literally this month, I want to say maybe a couple weeks ago, we completed all 200 scans.
So, and just really quickly, right? So you're taking people who fit that triad,
right?
And you're doing blood work and you're scanning their hearts to look for calcium buildup.
Not just calcium. Okay. So the technology it's called a CT angiography.
Okay.
Or CCTA. It basically is looking through all the participants are getting contrast dye that basically allows the lumen, which is the vessels themselves, the inside of the vessels, to be viewable from this very high-powered CT that's taking pictures from all sorts of different directions, so it can literally make a 3D scan of their heart.
Yeah.
It's very high resolution.
Do they get to keep the scan and 3D print it? Because I'd be down for that.
Okay, well, get this. Get this. You can, in fact, order as an add-on a 3D print of your heart. Yeah, after you've had it.
I just want the STL. I want to print it myself.
Yeah. Basically, what we're doing is we're getting 100 participants. We're doing exactly what you said, the blood work, but also getting the CTA at day 0.
Okay.
And then that participant, roughly 365 days afterward, will get a second CCTA. And when they get that, we'll have the comparison at a population level. We'll have all 100 participants with 2 scans each.
So with those 2 data points, you can see what happened to them in that intervening time.
Right. And the present conventional lipid hypothesis would say they're going to absolutely have a rapid increase of plaque development.
Because of the level of their lipoproteins.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Because and we already have now some of that data to know it's going to be somewhere north of 260 LDL, which gets me back to my own story, right? Because I was at around 240, 250, something like that. So, and the average age, they're in their 50s. So there's conventional lipid hypothesis would say, well, they've had 5 decades of accumulated LDL exposure, which should have already developed some degree of plaque.
Right.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, they'll have that plaque, that LDL burden, as it's described, in addition to now not only that year difference, but we now have baseline data to know how long they've been at those levels. And that's almost half a decade. The eligibility was you needed to be at these levels for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
the average for this match analysis that we ran month before last, was for 4.7 years.
Oh, wow.
So nearly half a decade. At very, very high levels of LDL, there should be a clear signal of plaque development.
Yeah, those scans, the day zero, should show probably quite a bit of disease in these
Correct.
people.
The day zero should. Correct.
Yeah. So you've got this study going on, and so you have the first scan data, or you have the second scan data?
Well, now we have the second scan data. We did a match analysis on the first scan data against another group,
Okay.
what's known as a match control with Miami Heart. Matched it up for age, matched it up by demographics.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and that got to be announced in December.
Okay. Of 2023.
Yeah, and the Miami Heart Group had about an average LDL. Their LDL was around 123. Ours was 272. It was 80 from our group that was within their age range versus 80 from their group that was matched as closely as possible. And actually, ours, there was no statistically significant difference between our group and theirs
Okay.
on plaque, on total plaque score. But on top of that, while I'm not trying to claim that ours is doing better, our area under the curve for our cohort actually was lower than theirs
Okay.
in total plaque score. Again, no statistically significant difference,
Right.
but not even trending in the direction towards higher plaque volume compared to the Miami Heart cohort.
And if
Yeah.
people want more, like, they can go down the rabbit hole with this and look at all of the data, because is it published yet?
It's about to be published.
Okay. Because Dr. Budoff did a presentation on it where he showed some of the stuff. You did a bit of a presentation recently at the Metabolic Health Summit where you
Right.
talked about it as well. But if this sounds interesting to people, they can go and investigate this and see what more of what you're talking about. Go down the rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, not only do I have Budoff's presentation on my channel, on my YouTube channel, but also I have sort of a further video that I made that kind of discussed this a bit more. Nick Norwitz also has a video on it, which is linked in the descriptions.
Okay.
But yeah, to be fair, it's now two things. The match analysis we're really interested in, but of course we're also interested in the longitudinal. Are we going to see this pronounced increase in pronounced increase in plaque development? Now, to be fair, we do expect there to be a population level increase in plaque, period, just in
As
general,
people get older.
Yeah.
because any 55-year-old group is likely going to have a net increase in plaque. And this, by the way, would even include those with PCSK9 loss of function. It's just more likely than not you're going to see an increase than not an increase.
Yeah.
No matter how healthy your group is, right? So I want to manage everyone's expectations if they're, assuming that there's some magical anything that can keep middle-aged people from developing plaque at a population level. But that said, we'll have more granular data. And importantly, we'll be able to see how much LDL correlates to plaque development.
Yeah.
And in the match analysis, it didn't correlate at all. What people's standing LDL levels were had very little correlation with their existing plaque.
Interesting.
But now with the longitudinal, where you're looking at the first scan, looking at the second scan,
Yeah.
we have an even tighter level of awareness of exactly what their LDL was at the beginning and also at the end, and how much that did or did not affect existing plaque if they had existing plaque, or presentation of new plaque. Now, presumably, with the lipid hypothesis, it should correlate, at least a little bit.
Yeah. Let's get into a little bit more of a controversial topic, or a fun topic if you prefer. A couple of years ago, you did an experiment with white bread and turkey.
Yep.
Funny enough, one of your friends was at the same time was doing a different experiment where she was actually using Keto Chow, which was a lot of fun. But can you tell us about the turkey and white bread experiment?
Yeah. I would call it white bread and processed meat experiment,
Okay,
because
okay.
it was also ham and a few other things. But basically, the gist was this. I kind of wanted to just do a big demonstration of this model that I've been kind of loosely talking about here, which is look, if I'm choosing to be powered less by fat very quickly and instead be powered more by carbs, then I should see a very rapid drop in my LDL cholesterol.
Because those trays of hors d'oeuvres aren't being taken around
Right.
full of stuff anymore.
There's less need, I'm telling my body, less need for you to maneuver around fat. The reason is because of my stored glucose, the counterpart to fat, will have been repleted. And because of that, the body's like, oh, so I don't need to traffic as much fat because you've got more than enough glucose. It's a very simplistic version of this, right? I wanted to demonstrate, but without using a recommended diet.
Okay.
So a lot of folks will be like, oh, you know what? You should go plant-based instead of low carb because plant-based, you get more phytosterols and you get more, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to be like, you know what? Intentionally, I want to go with a diet nobody would recommend. And so I was like, it needs to have enough carbs. And I kind of intentionally wanted it to have a lot of meat.
And it was pretty low fat, too.
Exactly. It was very low fat. So I was like, you know what? If I did white bread and then I did specifically meat-based protein, but that's very lean, then I should be able to pull all the levers I need to. And I put out a video in advance to predict that I'll probably drive my LDL lower than it's ever been, including pre-keto.
Yeah.
And I wore a CGM throughout, which in retrospect, I feel kind of mixed about because it started impacting my interest in continuing the experiment. I kept going and started from a ketogenic context. My LDL at the beginning of the experiment was actually 296, so it was a bit high. And then 7 days later, I had driven it down to 83.
Just the bread and meat.
Just with the bread and meat.
And that's all you ate all day long for your food?
Yep.
Siobhan said you were pretty miserable.
It was. I had a lot of anxiety. And it was kind of bad for her and everybody else in my orbit because I was also very irritable.
Yeah.
It was, and to be fair, this isn't me trying to demonize carbs per se. It was also just a radical shift in diet,
Right.
Yeah.
period, which can be its own confounder. But that did get a lot of attention. And the me of then, this is in 2018, it's like, oh, okay, and if it's big enough, it'll be viral on its own. Well, so flash forward to a year ago, I'm now well into publishing a lot of this research with Nick Norwitz, who I've been collaborating with a lot. And he would regularly make the joke online on Twitter, look, if, let's say, Oreos were to lower my LDL, because he understands the lipid energy model all too well. Yes, Oreos, if this were to do it, then that should be enough to get the discussion going. And that eventually became something where he was like, you know what, I'm going to just do this. I'm going to actually do, a version, if you will, my own version of this experiment, except that he turned it up by several measures. For one, he was willing to do something I wasn't willing to do, which is that he was going to make it a crossover between Oreos on one end and statins on the other.
Which is the standard of care.
Yeah.
Which is the standard of care. And predicted, which is what it turned out to be, that indeed, per the lipid energy model, we were going to see a bigger drop in Oreos by the Oreo intervention, which I'll get into in a second. But there's another important thing he did differently that I really credit him for, which is that you could have said with my experiment with the white bread and processed meat, oh, I dropped saturated fat. And much of the higher LDL was due to the saturated fat.
Yeah.
What Nick did differently, which I really think was great, is he did not swap any of his diet out for bringing in the Oreos. And his diet already is not very high in saturated fat, which makes it all that much more interesting. Mm-hmm. But this was an addition.
Okay, so you just ate everything the same, but added Oreos.
And I believe a sleeve of Oreos.
Like a day.
Each day. Yeah.
That's a lot of Oreos.
That's a lot of Oreos.
Yeah, and on top of that, it really should be said that this was kind of a big move on his part because he already, part of why he's on a ketogenic diet is to manage his ulcerative colitis.
Okay. Oh, so he probably felt crappy.
He felt horrible. It was, and so we really have to credit him for, I would say, taking one for the team, as it were, right? Then he did this for 14 days, and the LDL had come down so much. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was like 124. That he and his physician said, let's go ahead and repeat this in triplicate. So there was a 15th and 16th day, and it kept going down to where ultimately it stopped at 111.
Wow.
So his started out at, hope I'm quoting these numbers correctly, I think it was 360 roughly at the beginning. Because again, his is much higher than mine, down to 111. I just know that the total percent drop was 71%.
Which is...
That's a lot.
1%.
Yeah.
And the statins did...
Yeah, so real quick, he has to stop that and then have a washout phase.
Right.
So his body composition can come back.
Get rid of these.
Right. Yeah, get rid of those. And then started statin therapy, and he started actually a high-dose statin. It was Crestor at 20 milligrams, which is considered fairly high dose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And per William Cromwell, who was collaborating with him on the experiment, needed at least 6 weeks. Well...
Yeah, because it takes a while for medication to work.
Takes a while, but its nadir, which is its lowest point, was at 4 weeks. And that lowest point, it had brought his LDL down a total of 35%. So about less than half.
So the Oreos wins.
The Oreos were like twice as much.
But you're not saying people should.
No.
What's the whole point of this experiment?
Right.
The whole point is...
Because people are going to be like, so Dave Feldman is saying I should eat
Oreos.
No.
Yeah. No. The whole point was he wanted to, and he'll state this plainly, he wanted to help provocatively bring forward more interest to lipid energy model.
Yeah.
And unlike me, Nick he was a firestorm. He was so active in helping to promote this experiment. And it was great timing because unlike with the white bread experiment where we had no papers published, now we had a whole slew of papers published.
Yeah.
So he could not only reference them a lot, but in constant interviews he was giving and in the ones I appeared with him on, we would reference back to the existing papers. So it helped to really establish a lot of these studies and this data and the model. Helped to really bring forth that, no, it's not that Oreos lowering LDL cholesterol wins against statins lowering LDL cholesterol. It's that, hey, this is a dynamic system.
Yeah.
And we're trying to bring attention to the fact that if you start thinking about it in terms of metabolism, we can get the real conversation going that we think it needs to be.
Right.
And that's that, hey, like I was talking about earlier with atherogenic dyslipidemia, which is what it's called when the HDL is low and the triglycerides are high.
Okay.
This might be relevant when looking to LDL cholesterol and its association with plaque development, with atherosclerosis, this heart disease. This dysfunction in lipid metabolism, I'm going to keep using that term. We only can really start looking at it that way when we have a functional lipid metabolism. So that's why this is a scientific opportunity. If we just study those folks who seem to have a functioning lipid metabolism but do still have high LDL, high ApoB, well, then we can see how close this relationship is with plaque development in isolation. We've always needed to get away from these clusters.
It's interesting.
So cool.
When it comes up, the whole Oreo thing, I like to tell people when they're like, what is this even about? I'm like, okay, if we take the view that cholesterol is bad, and if anything you do to lower cholesterol is good, and if eating Oreos made cholesterol go down, then eating Oreos is good. But nobody believes that. We all agree that that's not a good thing. So how can therefore lowering cholesterol at all costs, how can that be good? And so I just love the conversation it's creating. And the back and forth. It's been really interesting to see people talking about that.
It's fascinating. It's really cool.
Indeed.
Yeah, it was a big part of the reason that this was moving forward. You know, not to tangent, but I actually did want to talk about this with you guys once we were all sitting together, is I'm very gun-shy about sounding like I'm intentionally being promotional, especially if there's, the appearance that there could be some kind of quid pro quo involved. Right. I've said this on social media a lot, but I'd love to just straight tell you both this. you probably already know this. Whenever I go to conferences, compared to other locations, I'm straight sampling your booth all the time. So I just want to say I'm thankful because I can now say this completely honestly from the bottom of my heart. I'm thankful for Keto Chow right now because I keep using it over and over again for like my dinner when I'm trying to keep it lighter. So if I have like a heavy lunch, and honestly, it's because I'm using it in the way that's almost never recommended, which is that I just mix it on the spot and then just drink it right then. So
it's fine. It's fine to do that. Nutritionally, it's fine.
Right.
It's just that it doesn't taste quite as good if you drink it right away.
Yeah.
But you can do that if you want.
Yeah. Like I'm not gonna pose per se and be like, this is why I drink it every day. But I can honestly say, and I genuinely am thankful that it's there.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of times where I'm really busy, and I love that there's just something I can just quickly mix up and put together. In that sense, it's great because obviously I want to help you guys out for also how much you guys help the research, but at the same time, just share what is in fact a legit anecdote of my own, in that it's been fantastic. It's just been a fantastic way by which I can take care of that problem.
Well, so we made Keto Chow not to replace your Oreos. No, not to replace steak dinner or things like that. It's when you are busy, when you're working, when you just need to grab something, but you don't want to have junk. Because it sounds like you're really busy right now. And your alternative is, I don't know, a Wendy's burger without
Old
the bun.
hamburger patty out of the fridge.
No, and it's that's exactly the issue, is that I don't get me wrong, if I can prepare food, if I've got the time on the preparation, I'm typically not going to go for a meal replacement no matter what it is.
Yeah.
But as far as particularly these days, it's just nice because I sometimes find it helps me to know I can focus on one particular meal, which is the meal that is going to be a lot more elaborate, if you will. And a lot of times my evenings get a bit busier, and it's just nice. It's nice to just have that as an option. The conference. So the COSI conference.
Yeah, the Collaborative Science Foundation. Or no, okay.
It is. So
COSI.
Let's take a step back, because I do think it's worth sharing the origin story of this conference. I had been floating to you and to Two Crazy Ketos multiple times. Oh, yeah, I'm just excited that we finally have a conference, and it's not the conference that we're about to talk about, but there's another conference that was in Vegas that I think did just one run.
They did one run, and the subsequent ones were canceled.
Yeah, and then there was going to be another one, and then ultimately it cut loose. But when chatting about that conference with you guys, I was like, I've always kind of thought maybe we should do a conference, but just as a fundraiser. And when that other conference canceled, I remember I was in Orlando. Mm-hmm. You and Two Crazy Ketos were there at the table.
Yep.
And I was like, because you guys were both like, you should do it. You should finally have this conference.
Yeah.
And I remember I'm looking to both of you guys. I'm like, okay, well then you, Chris, you're going to handle my AV. And you guys, Two Crazy Ketos, you're going to help with the promotion. And then somehow I talked my wife into it. I don't know. My wife is a bona fide saint for how much of this journey she's put up with.
So as of the recording of this podcast right here, you're actually sold out of the VIP tickets.
Yes, actually had several runs of being sold out. Okay. So there's the $500 and $1,000, which includes a VIP dinner.
Okay.
The VIP dinner, we were like, I hope we fill up the private room. But it's like 500 and 1,000. I mean, we don't know how many people. We maxed out that room. And then we went back to Silverton, the folks who were hosting, and said, actually, this is a good problem to have. Can we go and expand it out into like a larger area? And they were like, sure. We sold out that larger area.
Wow.
We then needed to add a second seating. We sold out the second seating.
Wow.
We needed to then expand to a third seating that was on Thursday, and that was like the maximum we could do. We sold that out. All of them are all sold out now,
That's awesome.
which is a credit to the community. It's amazing to me that there's so many great supporters who are making this happen. And for what it's worth, I need to pitch this. Even if you can't make the VIP, just be aware you can still contribute 500, 1,000. We'd love if you did.
Yeah.
Even though we can't offer the VIP, and if we do another one of these, which we probably will, we'll be scalable next time around. But we didn't know, we didn't know if we'd get 50 people or 100
Right.
people, much less that we'd get so many people that would reach deep to help us out on this. And I have to also give a big thanks to the speakers. Speakers are coming voluntarily, as in we're not covering their expenses.
At all, which, I mean, some times with the different things, they will pay them an honorarium, or they will pay for their flight, or they'll pay for their housing.
Appropriate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But because you guys are doing it just at it's a
Straight
fundraiser for, a really good cause.
Yeah.
And you kind of had to take the stand of, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's just again, these speakers, they're not only donating their time, but it's a lot to ask, to say, please donate your time, and also please pay for the plane ticket, please pay for, not that we're saying that, but I'm emphasizing to them up front. And again, hats off to all of them for their level of commitment to making this research happen. And so it makes it that much easier for us. The vendors, like Keto Chow,
Okay.
you're helping us pay for the venue itself. And literally all the rest of it's going straight to the studies. I mean, the one thing that I can tout on our end with Citizen Science Foundation is we have a true 0% admin overhead. Outside of third-party services like credit card processing fees or hosting, things of that nature. Not one single person who's connected to it takes a single penny of it. We move it all across. It's all volunteer work.
Wow.
Anything that needs to be somehow underwritten and moving one of us, if one of us has to travel to a location, we don't have Citizen Science Foundation pay for it. We have Own Your Labs pay for it.
Okay.
And so that way I feel good because I can tell everybody who's on the stream, I can tell you guys, look, everything we raise, as much as we can, it is like a through line. It's going from your pocket straight to the research.
That's really cool.
And on top of that, I got to say, Lundquist, Dr. Budoff, has been fantastic because he has way bigger clients than us. So I can tell you, bang for the buck for the money that we're spending for CT angiography, for their admin overhead, is insanely reasonable.
Wow.
And I can't even believe that we've talked him into another great price for this next study that we're raising money for. So this is a lot of goodwill that we're swimming in to get this research done.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's so cool, that you said the speakers are coming, and it just speaks volumes to this community.
Yeah.
That so much of us are just trying to build each other up. We're just trying to help people with their health and make the world a better place, right? And I mean, all those speakers who have all that knowledge, and it's just your willingness to come here and even talk to us is just awesome. So,
well, and just to drive it home, at the end of the day, what is the biggest concern about a low-carb diet, especially a ketogenic diet?
The doctors express it tends to be high cholesterol.
It is. And to be fair to them, they could be right. We need to get good data
yeah.
to find out either way. But we have to get good data.
Yep.
We cannot, for me, I'm not going to count on the statistical models that we extrapolate from people with dysfunctional lipid metabolism over to those that are functional. We should see this for what I think it is, which is a huge scientific opportunity. It's a good thing
Yeah.
that we have the opportunity to truly see this in isolation and to study it, but we have to make it happen. We just have to. And this is the good news is it's practically only about money now. Before, there was a lot of logistics and infrastructure. We had to get Citizen Science Foundation connected with Lundquist Institute. We had to go through a very lengthy IRB process of 9 months with the first study.
To prove that this wouldn't be bad for the participants and unconscionable.
Yeah, but look at it now. Now we will have data in hand if, knock on wood, it continues to look somewhat encouraging. We'll see, right? But it will allow us to do a study for which the eligibility criteria will be more relaxed. Contract work with the linguists, all of that stuff, all of the relationship building with the blood work vendors. I mean, a lot of it's just let's do it again, and that'll take 10% the work, right? 20% the work compared to the first time around. So really, it's just a matter of getting enough money that we can do what we want to do.
Right.
And I'll be upfront. What we want to do is more expensive than last time around because we want to have a built-in control group. So it'll be 100 of the existing people that we recruit, and another 100 that are going to be comparable to that group, at least as far as other markers. So, yeah,
nice.
It's going to be great, but it'll also cost some money. But we're on our way. We're on our way there. The conference is looking good. We've already raised a quarter of what we've needed even before this conference. So we'll find out by the end of this conference where we stand. But I think we can get there pretty soon.
Okay. So when is the conference again?
It's March 15th and 16th in Las Vegas. Beautiful Las Vegas.
Beautiful Las Vegas.
Yeah. And it's at the Silverton, so it's just south of the Strip. So even if you can't get rooms at the Silverton because you feel like it's a bit expensive, there should also be some Airbnb options. We had a great room rate, but that's
Gone.
Sold out too.
My understanding is there's a March Madness game going on at the same time. So
Vegas gets a little more expensive around that time. We're going to be more careful the next time around to try not to bump into the other events. Yeah.
But do you know everything?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Dave.
Of course, always.
All you people out there, if you have any questions for Dave or questions that you might want us to talk about in another episode like this, leave them down below. Let us know what you think.
Thanks. Bye.